Black wife texted her mum, "He broke my arm, sent 2 wrong number." Korean Mafia boss replied, "Don't move, I'm coming." Part 3. The children call it the Phoenix Room. The plaque beside the door reads, Transformation Studio, but nicknames have a way of sticking when they capture something essential. Inside, the walls display a timeline of recovery. Photographs of destroyed exhibition spaces after the attack 2 years ago, architectural drawings of reimagined structures, progress shots of rebuilding, and finally, images of the grand reopening celebration. A visual journey from destruction to rebirth. I was arranging new artwork on the timeline, photographs from our latest satellite center in Busan, when Mei Lin appeared in the doorway. At 17, she'd grown from the traumatized 13-year-old who first came to Eastern Sun into a composed young woman with serious eyes and surprising grace. The scars on her forearms had faded to thin silver lines, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Like many of our success stories, her wounds had healed into strength. "Ms. Kim, there's someone asking for you at reception," she said, her voice carrying the slight formality she maintained despite our years of work together. "He doesn't have an appointment." I smiled at the Ms. Kim, a title I both used professionally and found slightly amusing given my continued insistence on maintaining my separate identity alongside my marriage. 3 years with Jae-sun, and I still kept my own apartment, my own bank accounts, my own spaces. Not from lack of trust, but from hard-won recognition that independence and intimacy could coexist without diminishing either. "Did they give a name?" I asked, securing the last photograph on the display board. "He said to tell you it's about a wrong number." My hands stilled. That phrase, our foundation's name, had become well known throughout Seoul, but something in Mei Lin's tone suggested this wasn't a routine inquiry. "I'll be right there," I said, gathering my composure along with my tablet. "Is Luca still in session with the new group?" "Yes, he's doing great with them," Mei Lin confirmed with evident pride in her young mentee. "The 12-year-olds really respond to him. I think because he doesn't talk down to them." At 13, Luca had transformed from traumatized child to peer mentor, using his own recovery journey to help others navigate theirs. His artistic talent had blossomed under continued guidance, his shadowy early works now housed in our permanent collection as powerful documentation of trauma's visual language. From darkness to light, his paintings charted a path others could follow. Walking through Eastern Sun's corridors, I noted the subtle security features integrated into the rebuilding, reinforced walls disguised as architectural elements, strategically positioned cameras concealed within lighting fixtures, panic buttons that resembled ordinary switches. Jae-sun's protective instincts embedded in the structure itself, yet never dominating the healing environment we'd worked so hard to create. The man waiting in reception stood with his back to the door, shoulders hunched beneath a worn jacket, hands thrust deep in pockets. Something about his posture, defeated yet vigilant, triggered immediate recognition. I'd seen that stance in countless survivors, that simultaneous collapse and alertness that spoke of prolonged trauma. "I'm Amara Kim," I said as I approached. "I understand you're asking about the wrong number initiative." He turned slowly, revealing a face mapped with exhaustion and something deeper, grief etched into lines too pronounced for his apparent age. Mid-30s perhaps, though stress had aged him prematurely. His eyes met mine with the particular hollowness I'd come to recognize in those who've witnessed violence too intimate to process. "My sister," he began, voice cracking on the simple phrase. "She tried to reach you. 2 months ago." My mind immediately accessed mental archives. Our cases were numerous now, with 3 facilities operating across Seoul and the new Busan location just launched. But certain interventions stood out, particularly those with challenging outcomes. "Sujin Park," I said, recognition dawning. "You're her brother." He nodded, something like surprise flickering across his weary features. "You remember her case?" "Of course." I gestured toward a private consultation room off the reception area. "Would you like to sit down, Mr. Park?" "Jun-ho," he corrected, following me into the softly lit space designed for difficult conversations. "Please, just Jun-ho." The consultation room, like all spaces at Eastern Sun, balanced comfort with functionality. Comfortable seating arranged for conversation without confrontation. Art created by program graduates adorning walls. Nothing clinical or intimidating, nothing that reinforced power imbalances between those seeking help and those offering it. Once seated, Junho's gaze fixed on his clasped hands, knuckles white with tension. They told me you were the one who spoke with her directly. Who convinced her to accept help? I nodded, remembering the text exchange, one of many I'd personally handled that echoed my own experience years before. She reached our crisis line. We dispatched a team to her location. You got her out, Junho acknowledged, a tremor in his voice. Got her medical care. Found her shelter. He finally looked up, eyes glistening. But it wasn't enough. The words landed with physical weight. I'd been in this field long enough to recognize what wasn't being said, what terrible news lay behind that simple statement. Junho, I said gently, what happened to Sujin? She went back to him. The words emerged broken, fractured by grief. Last week. Said she needed to collect some personal items. Documents for her visa application. His hands clenched tighter. He was waiting. Had been tracking her somehow. Cold settled in my stomach, the familiar dread of history repeating despite our best interventions, our most careful precautions. The police found her yesterday, Junho continued, each word clearly costing him immense effort. In their apartment. He's gone, fled after. Words failed him, but they weren't necessary. I understood with sickening clarity what had happened. Another woman lost to the cycle we fought so desperately to break, another life extinguished by the particular evil of intimate violence. I am so deeply sorry, I said, the inadequacy of language in the face of such loss painfully apparent. We failed her. Junho shook his head fiercely. No. You tried. You gave her 2 more months of life without fear. Gave me 2 months with my sister as she used to be, before he destroyed her. His voice steadied slightly. I didn't come for blame. I came because she told me what you said to her that night. How you understood because you'd been there too. I waited, giving him space to continue at his own pace. She said you promised her it could get better. That the fear could fade. That life could be rebuilt. He reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a folded piece of paper. She was starting to believe you. Was making plans. He placed the paper on the table between us. A brochure for nursing assistant training, corners worn from frequent handling. A future Sujin had been considering, a path forward she'd never get to walk. I need to know her death won't be just another statistic, Junho said, voice strengthening with purpose breaking through grief. That something will change because of what happened to her. The request, so simple, so enormous, resonated through me with visceral force. How many times had I wondered the same about my own suffering? How many survivors questioned whether their pain would ultimately mean something beyond personal tragedy? What did you have in mind? I asked, recognizing the determination beneath his sorrow, the need for action that often accompanies grieving. I work in software development. Security systems, specifically. Junho straightened slightly, professional identity providing momentary structure amid emotional chaos. Sujin's husband tracked her using technology. Spyware on her phone, monitoring software she never knew about. It's how he found her at the shelter, how he knew when she'd be returning to the apartment. Understanding dawned. You want to develop countermeasures. Protection against technological stalking. He nodded, a flash of something like relief crossing his features, being understood when words felt inadequate. Your organization helped her escape physically. But in today's world, physical distance isn't enough. Digital footprints lead straight back to victims. The truth of his observation hit with uncomfortable force. Despite our comprehensive approach, safe housing, legal assistance, financial support, therapy, we hadn't fully addressed the invisible tethers of modern surveillance. A significant blind spot in our protection protocols. We've been developing detection tools at my company, Junho continued, designed to identify monitoring software without alerting the installer. But we need real-world implementation, case studies, refinement based on actual situations rather than theoretical models. I considered his proposal, mind already mapping possibilities, potential integration with existing services, resource requirements. You're offering a partnership. I'm offering purpose, he corrected quietly. For myself. For Sujin's memory. Looking at Junho Park, broken by loss yet reaching toward action. I recognized the same transformative impulse that had driven my own journey from victim to advocate. The same determination to extract meaning from suffering, to convert pain into protection for others. We should discuss this with my team, I said, decision crystallizing. And with my husband. His resources could accelerate development and implementation considerably. Something like hope flickered across Junho's exhausted face. Not happiness, not yet, perhaps not ever again completely, but purpose. Direction amid devastation. Thank you, he said simply. Sujin said you were different. That you actually understood. As I arranged for immediate follow-up meetings, secured temporary accommodations for Junho whose apartment held too many memories of his sister, I felt the familiar dual weight of responsibility and possibility. Each failure hurt profoundly, each opportunity to improve our approach mattered equally. Later that evening, as Seoul's skyline transformed into its nightly constellation of lights, I shared Junho's story with Jae-sun as we prepared dinner in our penthouse kitchen, his domain where he still insisted on cooking traditional recipes passed down through generations of Kim family women. He raises a critical vulnerability in our protection protocols, Jae-sun observed after absorbing the details, his hands never pausing in their precise vegetable preparation. Technological tracking has evolved beyond our current countermeasures. It's not just about Sujin's case, I said, leaning against the counter beside him. I've noticed a pattern in our recent failures. Women who seemed safely extracted suddenly located by their abusers, often through digital means we hadn't anticipated. Jae-sun's knife stilled momentarily. How many cases show this pattern? 4 in the past 3 months. All involving men with resources, connections. I turned to face him directly. All cases where we initially succeeded in extraction and relocation, only to have security compromised later through sophisticated technological tracking. That suggests more than individual determination, Jae-sun said, analytical mind immediately identifying implications. Potentially shared methodologies, coordinated approaches. My thoughts exactly. These aren't isolated instances of persistent abusers. They're displaying technical capabilities beyond what individuals typically access. I accepted the cup of tea he offered, warming my hands around it. As if they're receiving external support. Jae-sun was silent for a moment, contemplating this information with the focused intensity I'd come to recognize as his strategic assessment mode. I'll have Min-ho investigate discreetly. Look for connections between these cases, shared associations, common resources. The following day brought unexpected development. Junho arrived at Foundation headquarters for his first meeting with our technical team, his expression more animated than during our initial encounter. I've been analyzing your security architecture, he said without preliminary exchange. There are vulnerable access points that could explain how tracking information is being obtained. In our secure conference room, Junho displayed complex technical schematics on the main screen. Foundation systems mapped with concerning clarity given his limited initial access. Your primary firewalls are solid, he explained, highlighting specific network segments. But there's evidence of subtle backdoor vulnerabilities that wouldn't appear in standard security scans. Specifically designed to extract client location data while appearing as routine system operations. The implications settled heavily. You're suggesting deliberate infiltration rather than external hacking, I said, mind racing through security implications. Someone with system access creating vulnerabilities. Junho nodded grimly. These modifications require administrative credentials, intimate knowledge of network architecture. They're professionally implemented, designed to remain undetected during routine maintenance. Internal compromise, I concluded, already mentally reviewing recent personnel changes, access authorizations, security clearances. How recently implemented? Within past 4 months based on code signatures, Junho replied, fingers flying across keyboard to display technical evidence. Whoever did this has significant expertise, corporate-level security experience rather than amateur work. I immediately contacted Minho, outlining the situation with efficient precision. His response was immediate, security team dispatched to headquarters, systems isolated to prevent further compromise, investigation initiated with characteristic thoroughness. By mid-afternoon, an emergency meeting convened in the Foundation's most secure conference room, communications equipment removed, electronic devices prohibited, physical security sweeps completed before discussion began. 3 potential internal compromise sources identified, Minho reported, distributing paper files rather than digital information. Technical staff with necessary access and suspicious activity patterns. I reviewed the profiles with growing concern, all relatively recent hires, all with impressive credentials, all having joined during our period of rapid expansion when thorough background verification had occasionally been expedited to meet pressing operational needs. Employment histories contain inconsistencies, Jae-sun observed, his analytical review immediately identifying key vulnerabilities. Reference confirmations performed but not fully verified through secondary sources. Exploitation of growth phase pressures, I acknowledged, recognizing the strategic infiltration for what it was. Placing assets during period of high recruitment when verification protocols might be streamlined. The realization carried significant implications. Not just immediate security compromise but longer-term vulnerability assessment. How many systems have been accessed? How much client information potentially exposed? How many women's safety potentially jeopardized by information leakage? Containment priorities. Jae-sun inquired, focusing on immediate response rather than recrimination for past vulnerabilities. Isolate compromised individuals without alerting them to detection, Minho recommended. Deploy counter-surveillance to identify external contacts. Replace critical systems with clean architecture under Junho's direct supervision. And affected clients? I asked, primary concern always centered on the women whose safety depended on our security protocols. Emergency relocation protocol for highest risk cases, Minho responded without hesitation. Secondary contingencies for all active clients. Enhanced physical security until technical vulnerabilities addressed. The scale of necessary response was sobering, significant resources required, operational disruption inevitable, potential risk to vulnerable women despite precautions. The Foundation faced its most serious challenge since establishment, testing not just our security systems but our fundamental promise to those who trusted us with their safety. Implementation began immediately. Security teams deployed with careful coordination, compromised staff monitored rather than immediately removed, technical systems gradually transferred to clean architecture developed by Junho and verified team members. Throughout the complex response, I found myself drawing on everything the past years had taught me. Crisis management skills developed through countless interventions, strategic thinking honed through organizational leadership, emotional resilience forged through personal recovery journey. 3 days of intensive operations revealed disturbing confirmation of our suspicions. Counter-surveillance identified direct communications between compromised technical staff and individuals connected to Kim Jin-woo's organization. Client information had been systematically extracted, security protocols deliberately undermined, vulnerable women's locations potentially exposed to abusers seeking to reclaim control. Coordinated infiltration, Jae-sun concluded during emergency briefing in his private office, one of few locations we could guarantee remained secure from surveillance. Professional operation targeting Foundation effectiveness at multiple levels. Beyond business rivalry, I observed, the evidence suggesting something more targeted than incidental leverage against Jae-sun's enterprises. This feels personal. Specifically aimed at undermining our core mission. Jin-woo has always taken defeat personally, Jae-sun acknowledged, something like regret briefly crossing his features. Our history contains significant points of contention. The careful phrasing suggested past conflicts beyond business competition. Personal encounters during Jae-sun's earlier operations that had created lasting enmity rather than mere strategic opposition. He's using our foundation as battlefield for unresolved conflict, I concluded, anger rising at the calculated exploitation of vulnerable women as pawns in power struggles they had no connection to. Targeting domestic violence survivors to settle scores with you. Targeting what matters most to me, Jae-sun corrected quietly, meeting my gaze with rare unguarded emotion. Using your life's work as leverage point because direct approaches would trigger immediate response. The simple articulation clarified everything, Jin-woo's strategy exploiting the one vulnerability Jae-sun couldn't simply eliminate through usual methods. Using the Foundation's legitimate operations, its ethical constraints, its commitment to legal methods as strategic advantage against someone who would otherwise respond with immediate, decisive force. So we're facing coordinated opposition from two directions simultaneously, I summarized, organizing complex threat landscape into actionable assessment. Networked abusers sharing counter-surveillance techniques to maintain control over partners seeking freedom. And professional operatives deliberately undermining our security systems to compromise client safety as leverage against your business interests. Effectively using each other's resources for mutual benefit, Jae-sun confirmed. Abusers gaining professional support for technological tracking. Jin-woo gaining proxy pressure points without direct engagement. The calculated exploitation of vulnerable women as tactical assets in power struggles filled me with cold fury. The particular anger that came from witnessing patterns of control and manipulation replicated at systemic level. This ends, I said with quiet certainty, decision crystallizing from complex emotional and strategic assessment. Not just containment or defense, but decisive resolution. Jae-sun studied my expression with careful attention, recognizing the shift in my usual balanced approach. What are you proposing? Comprehensive response addressing both threat vectors simultaneously, I replied, strategic clarity emerging from justified anger. Technical countermeasures implementing Junho's security architecture across all systems. Operational security overhaul eliminating compromised personnel and enhancing verification protocols. And Jin-woo? Jae-sun asked, the question carrying layers of meaning we both understood perfectly. Direct engagement, I said firmly, moving beyond my usual preference for indirect approaches. Make clear that targeting vulnerable women crosses boundaries that won't be tolerated, regardless of business conflicts. Something like approval flickered across Jae-sun's features, recognition of necessary decisiveness rather than satisfaction at potential confrontation. I can arrange that conversation, he offered, voice carefully neutral despite the significance of my shift toward more direct methods. We arrange it together, I corrected, decision forming as I spoke. This isn't just your business rival targeting your interests. This is direct attack on my life's work, on women who trust our protection. I participate in establishing consequences. Surprise briefly registered in Jae-sun's expression. Not at my resolve but at my willingness to engage directly in aspects of his world I'd previously maintained distance from. Our partnership had always included certain boundaries, domains where each maintained primary authority, approaches that respected different ethical frameworks. You understand what direct engagement with someone like Jin-woo entails, he said carefully, neither encouraging nor discouraging but ensuring fully informed decision. The methods. The potential consequences. I understand perfectly, I confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. Just as you've respected my boundaries regarding Foundation operations, I've respected yours regarding certain business matters. But this situation crosses those boundaries. Creates intersection requiring joint response. Jae-sun considered this thoughtfully, weighing implications with characteristic thoroughness. Your direct involvement changes parameters significantly. Creates different strategic landscape than if I addressed this through established channels. Precisely, I acknowledged. Jin-woo expects you to respond as you have historically, through power dynamics he understands and has prepared for. My participation introduces unexpected element. Strategic advantage through unpredictability, a concept Jae-sun appreciated immediately, his slight nod indicating recognition of tactical soundness despite personal reservations about my involvement. "If you're certain," he said finally, concern for my well-being evident beneath strategic assessment. "I've never been more certain," I replied simply. "Some threats require direct confrontation rather than indirect management. You taught me that years ago." The reference to our beginning, his immediate, decisive intervention when Marcus threatened my life, carried particular significance in current context. Sometimes protection required force rather than diplomacy, confrontation rather than accommodation. Implementation proceeded with characteristic efficiency. Junho's security architecture deployed across clean systems, compromised personnel quietly removed while counter-surveillance monitored their external contacts, affected clients relocated with enhanced protection protocols. Simultaneously, Minho arranged the meeting that would address root causes rather than merely symptoms. Direct engagement with Kim Jin-woo regarding boundaries that could not be crossed regardless of business rivalries or personal grudges. The selected location reflected careful strategic calculation, neither Jae-sun's territory nor Jin-woo's, but neutral ground with historical significance to both. A traditional tea house owned by elderly woman who had known both men's grandfathers, whose establishment had served as occasional meeting place for discussing matters outside official channels. Madam Cho maintained strict neutrality, Jae-sun explained as we arrived in unmarked vehicle, security team establishing perimeter without visible presence. Her establishment has hosted negotiations between rival factions for generations. All parties respect her boundaries. The tea house itself embodied traditional elegance, centuries-old architecture maintained with meticulous care, interior spaces arranged for both beauty and discretion. Private rooms separated by paper screens thin enough to ensure occupants remained aware of surroundings but thick enough to muffle conversation details. Madam Cho herself, diminutive, white-haired, carrying dignity that commanded immediate respect, greeted Jae-sun with familiar formality that suggested long acquaintance balanced with professional distance. "Kim SSI," she acknowledged with slight bow. "It has been some time since you honored my humble establishment." "Too long, Madam Cho," Jae-sun replied with genuine respect. "Your tea house remains unmatched in both quality and discretion." Her sharp eyes shifted to me, assessment immediate and comprehensive. "And this must be your wife. The one who builds shelters rather than empires." The simple characterization, so accurate in its economy, indicated information networks extending far beyond the traditional tea house walls. "Amara Kim," I introduced myself with respectful bow matching her own. "Thank you for facilitating this meeting. Some conversations require proper context," she replied cryptically. "Please follow me. Your counterpart has already arrived." The private room she led us to balanced opposing requirements perfectly, intimate enough for direct conversation, open enough to prevent ambush, traditional enough to remind all parties of historical contexts extending beyond immediate conflicts. Kim Jin-woo rose as we entered. Tall, slender, impeccably dressed in Western business attire that somehow seemed deliberate rejection of the traditional surroundings. His features combined aristocratic refinement with calculating coldness, eyes assessing us with predatory attention that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Jae-sun," he acknowledged with minimal inclination of his head. "A surprise to receive your invitation after such extended, professional distance." His gaze shifted to me, something like curiosity briefly displacing calculated neutrality. "And Mrs. Kim?" Even more unexpected. I was unaware this meeting concerned social matters rather than business. "The distinction has become irrelevant," Jae-sun replied as we seated ourselves across from Jin-woo, Madam Cho silently arranging traditional tea service before withdrawing with discreet efficiency. "Given your recent operational decisions." Jin-woo's expression remained carefully composed, revealing neither confirmation nor denial of implied accusations. "Business evolves. Markets overlap. Competition inevitably creates friction points. Targeting vulnerable women seeking safety crosses boundaries beyond business competition," I stated directly, refusing preliminary diplomatic exchanges in favor of addressing core issues. Using domestic violence survivors as leverage points demonstrates fundamental misunderstanding of acceptable parameters. My blunt approach clearly surprised Jean Wu, perhaps expecting me to remain decorative accompaniment to business discussion rather than active participant establishing terms. His momentary recalibration visible in slight narrowing of eyes before composed mask returned. "I'm afraid I don't follow your meaning, Mrs. Kim," he responded with practiced confusion. "My enterprises operate entirely within legal frameworks. If you're referring to specific concerns, perhaps clearer articulation would help establish mutual understanding." The calculated obtuseness, pretense of ignorance despite clear evidence, reflected strategic approach designed to maintain deniability while assessing our information sources, our certainty levels, our willingness to escalate beyond diplomatic exchanges. "3 of your security operatives infiltrated the wrong number initiative's technical division," I stated with precise clarity, eliminating ambiguity. "Client information was extracted, security protocols compromised, vulnerable women's safety deliberately endangered. Simultaneously, you've provided technical support to network of abusers connected through Seoul Business Association Inner Circle, facilitating technological stalking of women attempting to escape violent relationships." The detailed specificity clearly surprised Jean Wu, evidence of intelligence beyond what he'd anticipated, confirmation that his operations had been identified with granular precision rather than general suspicion. "Serious accusations," he observed after brief recalibration, tone remaining carefully neutral despite visible tension in his posture. "Though entirely without substantiation, of course. Business rivalries often generate misinterpretations of coincidental patterns. Your operative Choi Hyun-woo executed Park Sang-min after his wife's murder," Jae-sun stated flatly, transitioning from implication to direct accusation. "Hotel security footage places him at scene. Financial transfers connect payment directly to your accounts, albeit through expected intermediaries." This revelation visibly unsettled Jean Wu. Specific operational details suggesting information sources within his organization, vulnerability he hadn't anticipated when planning complex leverage campaign against Jae-sun's interests. If such evidence existed, he countered carefully, it would presumably be in police hands rather than subject of private tea-house conversation. Landed with visible impact despite Jean Wu's attempt at maintaining composed facade. "You've miscalculated fundamentally," Jae-sun continued, voice carrying quiet certainty rather than emotional intensity. "Assuming business rivalry justified targeting humanitarian operations. Believing I would respond through traditional channels rather than direct intervention. Most significantly," I added, maintaining direct eye contact with Jean Wu, concluding that women seeking safety represented acceptable collateral damage in unrelated power struggles. Jean Wu studied us both with recalibrating assessment, clearly recognizing miscalculation in strategic approach, underestimation of both information gathering capabilities and willingness to establish direct consequences beyond business maneuvering. "If operational overlap has occurred," he offered cautiously, beginning strategic retreat without direct acknowledgement, "it represents unfortunate coincidence rather than deliberate targeting. Clarification of boundaries would naturally benefit all parties involved." The calculated ambiguity, neither admitting actions nor denying future adjustment, represented classic face-saving positioning while recognizing untenable strategic situation. "Boundaries are being clarified presently," Jae-sun stated with quiet finality. "The wrong number initiative and all affiliated operations are permanently outside acceptable strategic targeting. Women seeking safety from domestic violence are not legitimate leverage points regardless of business conflicts or historical grievances. Violation of these boundaries will trigger comprehensive response," I added, ensuring complete clarity regarding consequences. "Not through business channels or legal frameworks, but through direct action proportional to threat level." The explicit statement, coming from me rather than Jae-sun, clearly registered with Jean Wu, his reassessment of dynamics visible in subtle shift of attention between us. Whatever strategic calculations had assumed I represented softer influence on Jae-sun's operations were being rapidly revised in face of direct, unified position. Additionally, Jae-sun continued, "Operational assets currently positioned within Foundation technical infrastructure will be permanently reassigned effective immediately. Support for surveillance technologies utilized by Seoul Business Association members will cease without exception." Failure to implement these adjustments, I concluded, will result in immediate release of all documentation regarding your organization's involvement in Park Sang-min's execution, technological infiltration of humanitarian operations, and facilitation of criminal stalking activities. The comprehensive terms, clear boundaries with explicit consequences for violation, left no room for negotiation or reinterpretation. Not request but suggestion, not suggestion but mandate with enforcement mechanisms already prepared. Jin Woo's calculated pause represented final strategic assessment, weighing options, evaluating leverage points, recognizing fundamental shift in operational landscape that had occurred without his accurate intelligence regarding consolidated opposition to his approach. Operational adjustments can certainly be implemented, he acknowledged finally, concession wrapped in face-saving ambiguity. Misunderstandings clarified, boundaries respected moving forward. Business competition naturally continues within appropriate parameters. Naturally, Jae-sun confirmed with minimal inclination of his head, acknowledgement of terms accepted without pretense of friendly resolution. This wasn't reconciliation but armistice, not agreement but enforced boundary establishment. Implementation verification protocols are already in place, I added, ensuring complete understanding that compliance would be monitored rather than assumed. Confirmation expected within 72 hours. The meeting concluded with formal tea ceremony performed in silence, traditional ritual providing structured conclusion to confrontation without false pretense of harmonious resolution. Jin Woo departed first, composed dignity masking strategic defeat visible only in slight tension around eyes that had miscalculated fundamental power dynamics. As we left the tea house shortly thereafter, Madame Cho's knowing gaze followed our departure, silent witness to yet another negotiation between competing interests, another boundary establishment between powers whose conflicts stretched beyond immediate circumstances into historical contexts she alone fully understood. He'll comply, Jae-sun assessed as our vehicle moved through Seoul's evening traffic, security team maintaining discreet perimeter. Not from ethical recognition but strategic necessity. The evidence regarding Park Sang-min's execution alone would collapse significant portions of his legitimate operations. While potentially triggering investigations into other activities, I added, understanding the cascading consequences Jin Woo faced if evidence became public. His calculation is purely pragmatic, sacrificing specific leverage campaign to preserve broader operational integrity. Jae-sun glanced at me with subtle appreciation, recognition of strategic understanding that had developed alongside our personal relationship over years together. My comprehension of power dynamics, leverage points, calculated consequences had evolved significantly since our first meeting, though always filtered through ethical framework he respected even when not sharing completely. Your direct participation shifted dynamics fundamentally, he observed, genuine respect evident beneath analytical assessment. Removed his ability to frame this as traditional business rivalry requiring traditional response methods. While establishing that the foundation isn't merely adjacent to your interests but core priority with independent protective capacity, I acknowledged, understanding how our unified approach had created strategic advantage beyond what either could have established individually. The following weeks brought confirmation of strategic success. Junho's monitoring systems verified withdrawal of infiltration assets from Foundation infrastructure, technological support for abuser network ceased completely, Park Sang-min's case quietly closed with official suicide determination unchallenged by evidence we maintained in secure reserve. More significantly, the wrong number initiative's operation stabilized with enhanced security architecture, expanded protective capabilities, increased funding reflecting Jae-sun's recognition of its importance not just to me personally but to our shared vision of meaningful impact. Junho joined our technical team permanently, his sister's tragedy transformed into protection for others through his expertise. The anti-surveillance software he developed became standard implementation across all Foundation locations, identifying and neutralizing technological stalking without alerting abusers to detection. Lives saved through innovation born of personal loss. 3 months after the confrontation with Jin Woo, I stood in the Phoenix Room at Eastern Sun, watching Luca guide new program participants through artistic exploration of trauma recovery. His growth from traumatized child to confident mentor mirrored the Foundation's evolution, from desperate emergency response to comprehensive transformation system, from isolated intervention to network support structure. Ms. Kim. Maylin appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand reflecting her recent promotion to program coordinator. "There's a message from reception you should see personally." The note she handed me contained just 3 words in unfamiliar handwriting. "Wrong number saved." In the reception area, a young woman waited, early 20s perhaps, nervous energy contained in carefully controlled posture, eyes scanning environment with hypervigilance familiar to anyone who'd experienced prolonged threat. "I'm Amara Kim," I said as I approached, keeping movements deliberate and non-threatening. "You left a message." "Min-ji," she replied, hands clasping and unclasping anxiously. "Min-ji Lee. I texted your crisis line 3 weeks ago when my boyfriend destroyed my apartment. Broke my arm." She gestured toward cast partially concealed beneath loose sleeve. "The response team got me out, got me medical care, found me safe housing." I nodded, recognizing the general outline from dozens of similar interventions performed weekly by our expanded operation. "I'm glad we could help. Was there something specific you needed today?" "To volunteer," she said with unexpected directness. "When I'm healed. When I'm stronger. I want to help others like me. Like you did after your wrong number saved you." The simple request, reflecting transformation from victim to potential advocate, embodied everything the Foundation represented. Not just escape from immediate danger but journey toward renewed purpose, toward converting personal trauma into protection for others. "We have a program for survivor advocates," I explained, something warm expanding in my chest at this living embodiment of our mission. "Training, support, gradual integration into response teams when you're ready. Not rushing recovery, but building pathway toward meaningful contribution." Relief visibly washed over Minji's features, tension releasing from shoulders that had carried defensive posture so long it had become unconscious habit. "That's all I want. To make meaning from what happened. To help it save others instead of just destroying me." The articulation, so precise in its capturing of recovery's essential alchemy, reflected understanding beyond her years, wisdom forged through suffering yet oriented toward healing rather than bitterness. "The wrong number that saved me has become something I never imagined," I told her, abandoning formal organizational response for personal connection. "A network bigger than any individual, stronger than any threat, capable of transforming thousands of lives beyond my own." "Because you made it that way," Min-ji observed with surprising perception. "You could have just escaped and disappeared. Instead, you built something permanent." As I arranged for Min-ji's introduction to our Survivor Advocate program, scheduled her initial training sessions, connected her with appropriate support resources, I found myself reflecting on the journey from that desperate bathroom text years ago to this moment of organizational maturity. The wrong number that had connected me to Jae-sun had expanded beyond personal rescue into systemic transformation. Changing not just individual lives but social structures that enabled abuse, challenging power dynamics that maintained control through violence, creating alternative pathways where none had existed before. That evening, in the quiet of our shared penthouse terrace overlooking Seoul's illuminated expanse, I shared Minji's story with Jae-sun, another survivor beginning transformation from victim to advocate, another life redirected toward purpose rather than defined by trauma. "The cycle continues," he observed, characteristic economy of expression containing deeper appreciation for patterns recognized. "Your experience becoming pathway for others, their journeys eventually guiding more beyond them. Expanding ripples from single point of impact," I agreed, leaning slightly against his shoulder as we contemplated the city below, countless lives intersecting in patterns visible only from distance, only over time. "A wrong number that keeps connecting in ways we never anticipated." His arms settled around my waist, solid, steady, neither constraining nor possessive but simply present. Partnership embodied in physical gesture mirroring our evolving relationship across all domains. "Not wrong at all," he corrected gently. "Precisely right connection at precisely right moment. For both of us." The simple observation contained profound truth. What had seemed random chance, desperate error, mistaken communication had actually represented perfect alignment of need and response, of crisis and capacity, of broken reaching toward healing at exact moment healing became possible. Below us, Seoul continued its endless movement, lives intersecting, separating, transforming in patterns too complex for any single perspective to fully comprehend. Among those countless stories unfolded hundreds directly touched by the Foundation's work. Women finding safety, children healing from trauma, families rebuilding from shattered beginnings. All because years ago, terrified and desperate, I'd texted the wrong number, and a Korean mafia boss had replied, "Don't move. I'm coming." The most beautiful mistake I'd ever made. Subscribe for more stories of transformation and healing. Your support helps vulnerable women find their own wrong numbers that lead to safety and new beginnings.